Hello, Internet. Gino, that Gino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and this week we are going to be discussing RAD, the new roguelike brought to you by Double Fine Productions. I have mixed feelings on this game, and we're going to hash them out over the course of this episode. And I am joined, as always, by Pete, the King of Mutations, Busby.
What's going on, everybody? I have been described as a mutant in the past, but we're all mutants, really, considering human isn't a thing that's real. I also have mixed feelings on this game, and I'm very excited to hash them out. But first, animal fun facts. This week's facts are a suite of facts about squirrels. So squirrels' nut-hiding behavior actually much more complicated than it might seem on the surface. So first thing, squirrels will actually bite the nuts sometimes, so they can't germinate while planted. Very smart of the squirrels. Another thing squirrels do is they separate their stashes based on the types of nuts they are. So almonds go in one area, hazelnuts go in another, things like that. Scientists suppose it's a way to cut down on the things squirrels have to remember. It's basically a mnemonic device. Oh, almonds are by the maple tree or whatever. Last thing squirrels sometimes do is they will pretend to bury a nut and then go hide it elsewhere to trick their squirrel adversaries. They actually do it more often when other squirrels are watching or when scientists start raiding their existing stashes. So supposedly, apparently, squirrels maybe understand the intention to steal. Who knows? But regardless, a little bit more respect for your common neighborhood squirrel, please.
I like to believe that every squirrel is intensely paranoid at all times. Just strung out. They look strung out.
They do.
It's fitting. Very fitting. And we are also joined for this episode on RAD by the Savior, M. Palladino. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I don't have mixed feelings on this game. I have one feeling.
Well, that's a cliffhanger, folks.
Yes.
Find out what feeling it is later on in the show.
We'll discuss it. I think you'll figure it out pretty quickly.
Well, what a tease.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we get started, just a reminder, we've got feedback, and we've got a Patreon. Patreon, you can get at us, patreon.com/deeplistens. That is how you can support the show. We put the show on every week, and your support is what helps keep us going. If you support us on Patreon, you will get access to our community Discord, which we are on very frequently, and which we take questions from as an alternate source of feedback. So this week we have no emails to the email account, which means, M, the Discord report. Is there anything there?
Yeah, let's go to the Discord. This week on the Discord report, we once again go to the food channel for our source of entertainment, because it's the worst, and it was a mistake, and we should have never listened to ZP and made it. This week, we reopened the what is a sandwich debate. You guys, what are your favorite sandwiches?
My favorite sandwich. Are we getting expansive on the... Pete, you go first.
Okay, I'll jump in. So, I love gyros or gyros, depending on how authentic we want to be. Any version of peanut butter with bacon, peanut butter with bananas. But if I had to pick one sandwich for the rest of my life, it would probably be hot Italian sausage with peppers and onions.
Good choice.
Tried and true.
Mm-hmm. Gino?
Now I'm going to go conventional answer.
Mm-hmm.
Since I have turned to vegetarianism, I feel like the caprese panini is very standard. Your fresh mozzarella, tomato, maybe some red pepper in there, and some basil and balsamic and olive oil. That's a very solid sandwich. And if you're going unconventional, if you're a sandwich anarchist like myself, I would say a bean burrito. I really like bean burritos.
There you go. I see you've been following along with our conversation. Because some of the sandwiches that were presented are not very conventional, such as gyoza, dumplings, tacos, burritos, hot dogs.
What is the argument for dumplings as sandwich? Like, I could get behind hot dog or maybe even burrito, but gyoza?
Well, it's just a filling surrounded by some sort of grain.
Yeah.
I mean,
bread product is involved in order to hold some sort of meat, cheese, or vegetable. Tortillas count as bread. Cornbread counts as bread.
Rice.
Cake is a pie. Pie is a pastry. But some could say that even a cake is some form of a sandwich.
I would
depending
say
on what
that.
it is.
The world is chaos.
It is.
It's-
Once you embrace that it's all chaos, it's much easier.
It's complete anarchy, and you should join in on it. Join our Patreon to get access to the food channel and all the other channels that no one is using.
We have other channels that people use. The basketball channel,
Mm-hmm.
the Final Fantasy channel. These are channels that are used very frequently.
I have that one muted so I don't get any basketball stuff in my brain.
I thought you meant the Final Fantasy one. That seems way more worthy of muting.
That one also probably should be muted because ZP has been talking about Final Fantasy II. If you haven't listened to our Final Fantasy II podcast, he went on for about 2 hours talking about how unfortunate that game is.
Yeah, it hurt him.
You should
will
listen to that just to torture ZP.
We will finish that soon. We also had a question just asking us, and this is a good segue into the regular show. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And this is another bit of feedback from the Discord, but I think it's a good way to kick off our discussion of RAD. And it just says, how do you feel about the rest of Double Fine's output over the years? Are they a hidden gem factory or the most wildly overrated AA developer of our current epoch? And I feel like RAD is pretty emblematic of most of the Double Fine games I've played over the last few years, where the style, the art design, some of the writing is exceptional. However, the execution on the overall game leaves something to be desired, and there are usually a few glaring design flaws that undo what is otherwise a great concept.
For the sake of our viewers, could we list a few of the other Double Fine games either we've played or we've talked about?
Sure. Broken Age. So Psychonauts is much older. Same thing with Brutal Legend. We've got Stacking, Costume Quest. It's no longer Iron Brigade. It was Trenched, but it became Iron Brigade. What's the RTS one? I have
no idea.
It's on my shelf, but I can't see it from here.
I have
Massive
a list
Chalice.
in front
Massive
of me.
Chalice. That's
There
it.
it is.
Massive Chalice. They even made a game for the what was that terrible camera for the Xbox that you could move in
Kinect?
front of, the Kinect. They made a Kinect
Yeah.
game that was good. Like
They made like the Kinect game,
Yep.
Kinect Party.
Yep. So they've made a bunch of eclectic stuff, but
Yeah.
I would say that they're, unfortunately, all of those games are like Bs and B pluses and Cs and C pluses. Like, they haven't had an A in a while. And even the things that I would consider an A, most people, or it seems a lot of people do not consider, like Psychonauts or Brutal Legend. I think those are both A's for me, but flawed games, but I think that they are elevated above those flaws. I think at this point, some of their smaller games, the flaws are, or the highs are not as high.
Yeah.
And
I
that
think
brings us to RAD.
Psychonauts is pretty well acclaimed, actually.
Yeah, but some people hate the platforming in it
Yeah,
because
that's
it's very average, and then the end of the game is literally unfinished.
fair. There's that.
So RAD, it is a game that came out the week we started playing it. It's the first time we've been truly contemporary in a long time. It came out on the PC, Xbox One, and PC. And let me just get the full release info. It came out on August 20th. And it's a 3D roguelike set in a post-apocalyptic world. You play as a small child who's sent out into the world to restore power to the settlement that you grow up in. You can pick between a few. I think initially it's like 5 or 6 children. You're given a bat that will record your consciousness into other bodies. It's roguelikes.
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the explanation for why you can come back and do another run. And you're given a mutation treatment that makes your body able to survive in the wastes outside of your settlement. And in fact, instead of just surviving, you are able to metabolize the radiation around you and turn it into new growth. So your body basically becomes a walking, you have a green thumb. You are a walking engine of biological renewal. Like everywhere you walk, grass and flowers spread up under your feet. When you defeat mutants out in the wild, you absorb their DNA, and it causes you to slowly mutate. And you will mutate up to 3 abilities, 3 active abilities and multiple passive abilities per run. And you are trying to get from World 1-1 to World 3-2. And if you do so, you will advance the story. So
Simple enough.
Simple enough. And that leads me to kind of ask a pretty general question here. We're going to start with story stuff. What do you think the story was going for? Because it's kind of got this environmentalist message where you're going out into the world and you're trying to bring green and bring life back into an otherwise irradiated hellscape. But it also has this element of these kids. It's incumbent on the kids. None of the people who are around, because actually I forgot to mention in this game it's set after the second apocalypse. There were 2 apocalypses. One that wiped out a race of people called the Ancients, which seemed to be regular humans, and then a second one, which came after I think the Menders showed up, which are some people who have robots that seem to be kind of keeping the world afloat after the first apocalypse. And so only the kids are capable of going out and restoring power and fixing the world. And it's also heavily tinted with 80s nostalgia stuff. So any of those topics, go ahead. What do you think? What's going on with the story?
So it seems, at least at first blush, that this is going to be one of those stories where, the people in charge were the villains all along. You know what I mean? So you're sent out into the wastes by this shadowy sort of masked figure. And it seems like, okay, this guy's going to be the evil one. I'm going to find out in the wastes that, he was manipulating us kids all along, and now we need to take him out. Really doesn't work out that way, though. That's sort of the turn I was expecting. And it's nice to have expectations subverted, but not when they're subverted for something even dumber.
Fair.
Right. I don't know. I think there's a trend of this 80s nostalgia and featuring kids for some reason. I think that there is an age of developers that has reached maturity who is now making games that are trying to delve into this nostalgia some more, which is fine. We've got Stranger Things, stuff like that. But then you add on all this other stuff. It's a lot to take in, to say the least. I don't know about it. It's eclectic at best.
Yeah, I would say you hit the nail on the head on the developers coming of age. Anyone who was born in the early, I guess in the late 70s or mid 70s and grew up and had their kind of golden years during the 80s, now they've worked their way up to the points where they can control development. In most companies, they would be in their 30s or 40s now, meaning that they can be the head of a studio and can kind of impose their will or pitch things and have it accepted. And the people who would buy that 80s nostalgia stuff are now of age as well. And I think you get the Stranger Things, you get It being re-released again. And for some reason, I think we as a society have hit on 80s stuff being centered around groups of misfit kids being misunderstood, and then also all of the trappings like neon lighting, giant mohawks, weird sunglasses, just bright, garish colors. It's those trappings with kids.
I would take neon garish colors over Reaganomics. Like, if I have to pick one or the other, I'll pick the garish colors.
Yes, if it's exactly those two things, I would definitely pick the neon colors. But I mean, I think even like the Netflix show like Glow feeds into this as well. There's a lot of 80s nostalgia stuff, and RAD is clearly leaning into that. But I found that the 80s, other than occasionally having riffs where I'm like, wait, did they license a Van Halen song in this game? And then it just like peters out because they didn't. I didn't find it to be that compelling unto itself. All the stuff that interested me more was the kids and why are you putting these kids into a meat grinder? And why is this game trying to be kind of happy-go-lucky about it? When it seems like there's a welcome critique here, right? It's just a softball, but they don't go there all that much. Like, I did like 10 or so runs before I finished the game once, and it does something a little bit interesting. After you finish the game the first time, you get one ending, but it's actually one of 9 endings, meaning you need to beat the game 9 times to see them all. And each of the endings kind of builds upon the last, which just made me think, why is this a roguelike at all?
Yeah.
It would make sense from a roguelike perspective if the characters were differentiated. You know what I mean? So, like, once you finish with one character, they're gone, and now you have to start again with the next one. I can understand pitching it as a roguelike from that perspective, because each kid is basically competing the same quest.
Mm-hmm. Did they have any different abilities or anything? No. Okay.
They were just
so
cosmetically
it's just
different.
a skin.
No, they're free-floating quirks that you can apply, but none of them are tied to a specific skin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only differentiators are the bat you pick, but it's literally a weapon wall, and then how your character looks. Nothing else changes. Which
That's weird.
I think, Pete, if they developed it the way that you mentioned, where they actually differentiated the characters and used that, I think that would make more sense. Yeah, I would have been more interested if these kids were gone and they had to deal with it. But I found the things that appealed to me, like it's a roguelike, and if you're in for roguelikes, I guess that's appealing unto itself. But as someone who likes them but is not enamored with the format, it was mostly the story and the idea of a contiguous story. I was thinking, hey, maybe after I beat the game once, the world will change. And when I go back into a run, now it's a different world, or it will unlock additional challenges. And maybe after the 4th time or something, it does. But I beat the game 3 separate times, and the game played exactly the same each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially with such a focus on reestablishing verdancy, like basically bringing plants back to life. You'd think in subsequent runs there'd be plants, but no, there are never plants, except the ones you lay yourself.
Yeah, or you'd get different levels. Like, hey, now it's a jungle, or hey, now you need to go over here. You're not just getting power, you need to get this other thing. But from what I could tell, it seems like you just do the same run over again.
Mm-hmm.
Which
it's exactly the same every time. The levels aren't even that different from each other.
No, I started seeing the same cookie cutter pieces or same templates over and over again. And once I started identifying the patterns, it even invalidated some of the passive buffs and stuff, because I would know how everything looked and what everything did. So all of a sudden, the abilities that like highlight stuff on your map or something were just useless because I already knew.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just really feel like this game could have, if it was going to be a roguelike and they wanted to tell a story that was linear, I think they really needed to lean into it and do a little bit more in terms of making the characters individuated, like Pete said, or changing the world in larger ways. But if it's just going to be a game that asks you to play the same roguelike 9 times, it's not even like FTL or something where the runs are especially difficult. And you know, FTL is a game that has a very unique layout, so playing it is it stands out in terms of its design. Like, there's not many other games that play like FTL. So you could get away with having the story be a little bit lighter or having some elements be repetitive. But this is just an action-adventure game if it wasn't for the roguelike elements.
Yeah. This is just an action-adventure game that punishes you for dying, which, like, the thing with roguelikes is, like, have you played Rogue Legacy?
Yes. That was the first rogue thing that I would call a roguelike back before they added more stuff to The Binding of Isaac.
Mm-hmm. That one, you build upon each run. You're building a map. It's one continuous story, and you could tell that there are points where the story, like, merges, even though the level may change. You're going to be experiencing something new. There's, like, a different section of the castle to explore. And procedural generation has always been part of the genre, but at some point it has to, like, intersect. It can't just be procedurally generated the whole way down. That's boring.
Yeah, and you need to come up with some like, the unique designs need to be up there, right? Like in Rogue Legacy, there are unique bosses that you need to beat a section of the castle. It's always the same unique boss to finish the section of the castle. There are mini bosses that are randomly generated, and you might see the same one multiple times. But there are some challenges that are so integral to the design that they said this has to be how this boss works. And those truly unique bosses are the ones that stand out. In this game, there's one, and it's the final boss. All the other ones they're not randomly generated, but it's a grab bag of mini bosses. And even the grab bag of mini bosses, many of them duplicate design and art.
Yep.
Which it just, you can't have that.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going to have your runs, like, last an hour plus, like, to finish this game, I think you probably want about an hour, hour and a half to get to the end, and that's just a really long serving size for a roguelike.
It's so long. Runs in a roguelike should be like 20 minutes max. Like,
and you can't quit and save mid-level.
Yeah, there's no way to save. There's no, like,
You go ahead. You can say like, we're in it.
All right, we're in it.
That's the moment.
We're in it. It's like tacking the roguelike genre onto something is such a disservice to the genre as a whole, because this game should not be, by any stretch of the imagination, considered a roguelike. It should be an action-adventure game that you play once, maybe you play it twice. If you really want to, you could play it 3 times. But 9 times to get all the endings for one. This is the same problem we had with Nier. That's just ridiculous. Asking the player to go back to the beginning with no, like, marked improvement.
Well, you get more money. You get more money, and you upgrade your town. So you get more options and easier runs because you can afford everything all of a sudden.
Yeah. I mean, I never really, like, maybe I didn't utilize that. Yeah. But
yeah, so by the end of the game, the last run I had 1,500 tapes banked, so I could afford everything if I wanted to invest in a run. I had all 3 of the, like, random fruits that you can have, which basically gives you access to, I think, like 2.5 full hearts worth of healing, and then there's a boom berry which you can use as a grenade, but it will occasionally mutate and just give you a free endo mutation instead, which are the passives that you can get.
Right.
So it gets markedly easier the more you play, but the game isn't hard. It's like, most of the times I died in this game, and I don't know if you two had the same experience, I didn't feel like it was because I just couldn't handle what a boss was doing, or I couldn't, like, my reaction time wasn't quick enough. There are some builds where you just get bad upgrade, you like get bad abilities early on, and you're just non-functional.
Yep.
Or
It's
times where
entirely RNG.
yeah. Or times
There's
where you
no
get
way
bad
to
passives.
Yeah, like you could get the passive that lets you like it improves your range, but if you have no range stuff, that's just a waste of a passive. Like what there's no like logic to the upgrades aside from if you get the same one twice, sometimes it upgrades.
I
But
think they do give you certain upgrades that are specific to specific active abilities. Like only the passive will only show up if you have the active. Like there's Toxic Dump where you just like lay down toxic goo as a snail trail behind you.
right.
You can get a passive that will upgrade the amount you can dump at a time. And you only get that if you have Toxic Dump.
Okay.
So that at least happens.
Okay, that's better than I thought because I did not notice any of the like improvements stacking the way that I would expect them to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed was like sometimes my first mutation was something that was like purely mobility related, and then you just have a hell of a time with the first or second.
Oh
levels.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Like most of the deaths that I had were in the first that first level was just I didn't have anything good, so what could I possibly do?
Yeah, if you want to advance, like you really need to start, at least I found, with a ranged exo upgrade. Like if I got Armorang or Fireball, like early, and Armorang just lets you throw your arm as a boomerang, Fireball self-explanatory. It makes things so much easier. I'm like, okay, now I can start to buckle down.
Yeah, but here's something. First off, I played this game for like 25 hours, all told. So I played a lot of it. I played a lot of it. Once I got the first ending, it took me a while to beat it once. And once I saw it the first time, I'm like, well, maybe they're doing something, right? Maybe there's going to be another ending here, or maybe the game's going to change. And I'm interested. But I didn't know yet, you know? I hadn't seen that was not going to be the case. So I'm like, okay, I'll put in a little more time to see. I saw it doesn't change. But there were some upgrades I would get constantly, and I still haven't gotten Armorang.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really?
like there are some upgrades I've never seen. There's one upgrade I got a snake head.
I love that one.
I got it
my
once.
favorite.
Once in like 22 runs or 23 runs, and it was amazing. And then some. I think I've gotten bat wings like 6 times or 7 times.
They're bat wings?
Yeah. Bat wings are the best mobility upgrade, I think. But they don't have any offensive power.
That's fair.
But that's the problem. Like, you can fly for a bit, but if it's your first upgrade and you only have the bat, then bat plus bat wings is pretty bad when you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies, because the bat is not a very useful basic weapon. It's okay, but you really need range. And I found if I didn't get access to the passive ignore, like, environmental hazards abilities, that would also get me killed a whole lot.
Yeah.
If you didn't get immunity from toxic pools, fire, and electricity, but mostly fire and toxic pools, you would just take extra damage all over the place just because of weird
incidental
shit.
A lot of stuff on fire.
Yeah.
Like, lots of things are burning in this world.
Yeah, and a lot of enemies just leave behind fire or leave behind toxic pools. Thankfully, there's almost nothing that leaves behind electricity. Which is another weird design. Like, it's 1/3 of the damage types you have, and most things don't do it.
Yep. I don't know. I don't think they were particularly concerned about how it was balanced against the other damage types.
No, it shows
Just
up
a
in like
hunch.
2 or 3 places.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, were there any mutations, endo or active or exo are the active ones, that you found especially useful?
Snakehead every time.
Snakehead was good. Armorang was good. The Armorang upgrade was even better because it had basically like infinite range, and you get a saw. Yeah, that was good.
I only got that once.
Yeah, it's pretty clutch. Fireball's fine too. I mean, it's basically just another range attack.
Yeah, Fireball's okay. It's just the most basic attack, you know? It's the most uninspired design. Just I should have Fireball.
There's one too where you can hatch little minions.
Yeah.
Yes, Death Row. Death Row is excellent.
Which is, I mean, I always just love hatching little minions too.
Yeah, they're they're little monsters with your head. I found that death row basically invalidated most of the enemies. Like, there are some sections where you'd run into mini-bosses that are kind of in a little pit, and you're supposed to jump down there and fight them, and there's no way out unless you kill them. But you could just kind of sit on the edge and poop eggs into their pit, and your minions would kill them for you.
That's pretty good.
And death row, if once you've got the maximum number of minions out, the eggs just become bombs.
What? That's
Yeah, you can
crazy.
swab them out. It's a pretty good upgrade.
Yeah, which with an upgrade like that, which gives you passive buddies and also a bomb. When I got the bomb head, Warhead, it made Warhead feel really stupid because there's this other thing that does 90% of what it does, but an additional 100% of utility.
Yeah.
The it's not called Chrono Trigger. Chrono Speed Hyperdrive or something. You can slow down time and speed yourself up if you get the upgraded version.
Yep.
That one was pretty clutch too.
I only got it once.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I don't
seemed
think I
good.
ever saw it.
But when I did, I was like, "Oh, this is great. I'm flying."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me see. Is there any? I liked all the mobility ones were interesting with how they opened up the map because the levels as you go become the first level's got a lot of hills and mountains. The second level has a lot of crevices, and then the third one has just these gigantic gaps that if you fall into, you take damage.
The third one's such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's connected by what are essentially teleporters. But if you have wings or have a really good mobility ability, then you can actually just jump over the gaps, and that's pretty freeing. Like, you can get around the design of the level in a cool way, or like you can fly up to places that I don't think you're usually able to get to. And every time I did that, I felt like I was cheating a little bit, which is what you want in a roguelike. You want those sorts of little experiences.
Yeah.
But I found that to be much more freeing than it was useful. Like, one time did you ever have beast mode?
Is that the one where you get like centaur style?
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
So one time I got the bat wings and beast mode.
Ooh.
And so when you're flying, you lose all resistance from the ground. And if you activate beast mode when you're flying, you just get propelled in a direction with maximum velocity.
So just like infinite charge.
Well, you basically fly across the map if you want to. You can just jump from one end of the map to the other end of the map.
Damn, that's pretty cool.
Sick.
It was very cool. I died because it wasn't especially useful. The only times it was one thing that was cool about it was I could fly and then beast charge into people, and most enemies can't deal with an opponent that's above ground level.
Oh, I can't deal with flying centaurs. I know that much.
Exactly. So I could attack them as a flying centaur, and they couldn't interact with me. But the centaur attack does shit for damage, so I was invincible, but it took 10 minutes to kill anything, so I abandoned it. Were there any abilities you thought were especially bad or useless?
The one where you could take control of enemies.
That was what I was going to say with a bullet.
Yeah. Doesn't work on bosses. I think anything with a health bar, it doesn't work on.
If you upgrade it, it does, but the enemies don't follow you like your other minion types do.
Yeah.
They're kind of kited to where they originally spawned, and so if you can't drag other enemies into them, they won't fight for you.
Yep.
Pete, anything that you thought was especially bad?
No, I mean, I was going to say the same one. I didn't really use suck face that much either. Did you ever get that one? It's basically like a black hole. You can draw enemies towards you, or you can throw it out and draw them to that. So, I mean, if you have bombs, maybe it works, because then you can create like an AoE sort of deal.
Yeah.
But without that, there's no reason to really draw stuff into you that much.
Yeah, there's a lot of abilities that work when you're dealing with regular enemies that can fall off maps, but when you deal with any of the bosses, they do absolutely nothing.
Yeah, like that windbag one.
Yeah, Windbag,
Oh, yeah.
Windbag and the Batwings were two that, like I said, they were fun, like their mobility abilities, but they felt super redundant. Like the Windbag would blow enemies away from you, the Batwings would blow enemies away from you when you jumped. So Windbag let you jump really high, and then you could spend your jump to blow enemies away. The Batwings would send enemies away when you used your super jump, basically. So they felt like inversions of each other. But both of them, practically, offensively, just meant knock things off cliffs. There were at least 4 or 5 abilities I felt like that all they were good for was knocking enemies off cliffs.
Why are there so many cliffs anyway?
Yeah.
Like, why is all the land masses floating?
It's a good question. I mean, it's the apocalypse, post-apocalypse. It's
Yeah, but
post-second
that
apocalypse.
doesn't change the rules of gravity.
Well, they've got robots, and the robots put technology on the islands.
You're a child who gets irradiated and turns into a snake-headed, crab-legged thing.
Yes, all that is sound science.
I don't think that the level design is the biggest problem here.
Yeah, there were a few abilities that I was just like, eh. Like, all of the passives that earmark things on your map, after you learn about the map and learn how things repeat, like hidden rooms and enemy like hiding spots, once you can identify those, any of those passives were useless. I already knew it. But it did raise a question. Did any of you get hit with any of the bad mutations? The corrupted mutations?
Yeah, every once in a while they get.
Like
So,
what?
I mean, they basically just debuff, if I remember correctly.
So once you get to World 2 or World 3, there are machines like the endomutation machines that are really messed up looking. And if you use them, you have a pretty high chance of just getting hit with a negative ability instead of a positive one. Like there was one that made you vegetarian, and then all the meat pickups wouldn't work, but then vegetable pickups would heal you twice as much.
Yeah, there's another one, Ravenous, where whenever you pick anything up, you use it instantly, as opposed to being able to hang on to it.
Yeah. The worst one I found was short-term memory. You couldn't see the mini-map anymore.
Oh,
it was only a small circle around you.
No,
Another one gets
horrible.
rid of your plants, so when you walk around, you don't lay anything down.
Oh, so you don't move fast anymore?
No, not anymore.
Yeah, you move faster when you walk on the plants. So there's a reason. It helps you backtrack, but in a roguelike, why are you backtracking all the time?
Yeah.
So when I was playing, I thought it was kind of an interesting design decision because I've never seen a roguelike that builds in kind of a bell curve sort of fashion. Like, you start off really weak, then when you get to the middle, you're super competent. And then towards the end of the game, you are rapidly losing abilities if you don't play carefully. It almost felt like a life cycle, which was interesting.
Yeah, it makes sense from I guess it doesn't really make that much sense, but like from a radiation perspective, that over time you would get weaker as you get radiation sickness. But I mean, this just seems like another case, like we've been saying from the beginning, where the gameplay and the story is really at odds with each other. Like, it could work from a story perspective, but it makes for a worse roguelite.
Yeah, and it adds, like, they actually use that as one of the story elements. Like, I think ending 3, one of the endings, your character becomes mutated beyond recognition, and they get murdered by the townspeople when they come back, having restored the power. So, like, they use this stuff for story reasons, but it is a bummer sometimes when you're playing. And did you ever get the corrupt exo mutations instead of just the passives?
I remember a stupid one with my head, but I can't remember what it did. Yes, suckworm, something like that.
Yeah. So if
do?
you just spit goo not very far.
Oh.
But you can spit it very rapidly. I found it actually to be quite useful. But there's these kind of giant orifices in the ground that have a radius around them where if you stand in them for too long in level 3, they get rid of one of your slots and replace it with an unupgradable shitty mutation that also makes all the people who see you say, "What the hell happened to you?" Yeah, I think I got legs that made me run less quickly, I think, and then the worm thing. But it did feel very crappy having invested in some of these abilities and then having them taken from me because of, like, an unfortunate turn of events.
Too long. Yeah, that feels bad. Like, A lot of what I've been thinking about with games like this is like, does this feel good to play? And with this one, it didn't feel good to play a lot of the time, especially when you're punished for, like, participating in the game. I mean, there's one thing about, like, okay, you stood in a trap. That sucks. Don't do it again. But sometimes you just had to go that way.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to get out of it.
Yeah, I found that it just led me to not deal with most of these mechanics. Like, the correct way to play this game is to try to ignore a bunch of the things that are interesting. Like, after a certain point, if my character was competent, I didn't use any of the upgrade machines anymore because it just had a very high chance of screwing me. If I saw an area that had one of those giant cysts that mutates you, I just didn't go on that island unless there was a very compelling reason for me to be there. I just would skip over it. And it just leads you to playing very cautiously and not interacting with systems that they spent a lot of time on. If your mechanic is too punishing and there's no reward or very weak reward, and it's not like the ones that are really messed up, like the mutation machines that are really messed up, have better passives. It's the same role. You would just get a similar crappy passive.
Yep.
You could get perception.
There's like no tiers to the upgrades that you can get. So you could get a really shitty upgrade on like level 3 too.
Or you could get an amazing one on level 1 and then the game's cake.
Mm-hmm. You could get the snake head and then you're just gonna win the whole game.
Yep. Or the Scuzzy Dongle, which I found was a really good artifact you can get that makes every treasure chest one floppy disk cheaper, which means you just have, like, infinite keys. Damn. You get all the items for, like, free.
So does that reduce chests that are 1 to 0?
Yes. You just open them. And 2 to 1 and nice. 3 to 2. Yeah, that was pretty much... If I got that, and I got that a lot of runs... my run was fine because you just had so many healing items. Yeah, I wanted to like this game. I really did. Like, I picked it because I was very interested after playing it in PAX East. But unfortunately, the promise that I felt it had after the first successful run, I don't think they really executed. It's a completely competent roguelike. Some of the designs of the abilities I think are very fun. And the look, I think, is very solid, right? Like, the look of some of the mutations look very cool.
Yeah, I would say that's cool. I think their level design is a goddamn mess.
It looks like an apocalyptic wasteland.
Yeah. It was blinding for a lot of it.
Yeah, and especially if you get some of the upgrades that make your character's vision change. Mm-hmm. It can be hard to visually parse what's going on.
Yeah. Like, I think this is a game that... How long did you play it when you were playing it at PAX East?
Played for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's about right. You play it until, like, you die, and then you are done, you got the full experience. I think you were expecting, like, oh, it'll get more... crazy as things go on, and then it'll be really cool by the end of it. And then it was just like a straight line, just right on through.
Yep, it played very similarly. Like, they reveal in World 3 that some of the enemies you're fighting are kids that were like you but became too mutated, and you fight them. But they're just another enemy. After your first time seeing them, they're just another enemy. And that's the problem with being a roguelike. You can have these cool story beats or these cool designs, but at a certain point, a skeleton's a skeleton, or a bat's a bat. And it doesn't matter if it has a proper name or something. If you're going to go for a game that you want people to play for 100 hours or something.
Mm-hmm. I like that even less, now that I know that some of those kids are turned into monsters. Because I get what they're going for, but... I don't know. It's really dark, and this game doesn't need any more, like, elements added into it to muddle the mixture even further.
Yeah, and one thing that they had going was there's this narrator who's ambient and kind of explaining things, looking back from sometime in the distant future, and her narration I thought was really interesting early on as someone who really liked Bastion and other games that have implemented that sort of thing. But again, the more runs you go through, the more the dialogue repeats or strips away and undoes what originally was compelling there. You can only have the same line of dialogue so many times, and actually what they do is after they play it a few times, it just stops coming up. So the narrator just falls away entirely. So this thing that was compelling by your third run or fourth run, you might not even hear anymore. Yeah, it's a shame. I really wanted to like this game, and it's competent. Like, it's not a bad game, I don't think. It's just really mediocre. I've played a lot of games like it, and I don't know if I'm going to play it anymore. And it's a shame. I think that's it for RAD. Pete, did you have something? You said
Yes.
you wanted to talk about radiation.
I did. I did want to talk about radiation. So I want to talk about radiation within the context of its environmentalism message. So I think it's weird that they're sort of positing this as you need human intervention to restart this ecology. Like, it seems backwards. Like, plants should be thriving now that humans are gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
the history of Chernobyl actually backs this up. This is from an article I was reading. So a lot of researchers were looking like post-Chernobyl. And they were saying that the plants actually adapted really well. Like, after about 3 years, vegetation was recovering. All but the most vulnerable and exposed plant life survived. So these plant researchers looking into it, and they said that, this is a quote from plant research guy, there must be some kind of mechanism that plants already have inside them. Radioactivity has always been present here on Earth from the very early stages of our planet's formation. There was a lot more radioactivity on the surface back then than there is now. So probably when life was evolving, these plants came across radioactivity, and they probably developed some mechanism that is now in them. So these plants actually have an incredible ability to adapt themselves to radiation. They'd be fine without us. They'd be thriving now that we're dead. So I think the game sort of got it backwards in that sense.
Yeah, the notion that you are the thing walking through the world, making it habitable again. And the thing that you activate to advance in the game are respirators. And the respirators, they make a breathing sound, but what they do is just cause plant life to explode out. So it's a little bit of a mixed message there, or muddled metaphor. And I think you're totally right. Like, other than the second level where there's plant life everywhere, everything else is pretty arid and dry or completely foreign looking.
Yeah, like, they didn't have to pick radioactivity. Like, it could have been any number of things that caused. Oh, I guess they did for the mutations, now that I say that.
RAD.
Yeah.
A game called RAD probably wanted radioactivity.
It's a great name. I would like to, so there's one other sort of source I'd like to bring up in this case, just because I think it's super interesting. So back when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, this guy, John Hersey, he was a writer for the New Yorker, and they devoted a whole issue just to his account of post-bombing Hiroshima. They turned it into a book. They just called it Hiroshima. It's a good book. You guys should read it. But there's this one description where he's talking to a woman who survived the bombing, and she's describing sort of what happened in the landscape. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this.
Please do.
Yeah.
And it's in the New Yorker, you said, John Hersey?
Yeah, so the original story was John Hersey, Hiroshima in the New Yorker, and now it's a standalone book. He just sort of expanded the article a little bit. So there was something she noticed about it that particularly gave her the creeps. Over everything, up through the wreckage of the city, in gutters, along the riverbanks, tangled among tiles and tin roofing, climbing on charred tree trunks, was a blanket, a fresh, vivid, lush, optimistic green. The verdancy rose even from the foundations of ruined houses. Weeds already hid the ashes, and wildflowers were in bloom among the city's bones. The bomb had not only left the underground organs of plants intact, it had stimulated them. Everywhere were bluets and Spanish bayonets, goosefoot, morning glories, and day lilies. And then just sort of keeps going on the list of plants. So not only would the radioactivity have not necessarily destroyed the plants. It might have even stimulated their growth. And I think there's something both very informative and very creepy that probably the easiest way we're all going to destroy ourselves is going to make the plants perfectly happy.
That is poetic, and I can't do any better than that to end this. So, thank you, Pete, for that macabre image.
No problem. Happy to deliver it.
RAD is available on Steam. So, it is now your turn, Em, to pick. What game will we play next? You have a lot to live up to after Butterfly Soup.
Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about this for a while. I've wanted to play this game mainly because I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. We're going to play 2064 Read-Only Memories.
Oh, yeah!
All right. Okay.
Yeah, you like that game?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to play that game for a while. We've had... Let me just make sure that I am not... Read-Only Memories. Yeah, this was a Too Mellow soundtrack.
Yeah.
Friend of the show.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know that.
He's been on the show twice. An interview, and he introduced us to Detention, our game of the year 2 years ago.
Very good
wow.
game. Very good.
Yep.
So, this is going to be a fun little excursion, I think. Hope you guys like it.
Yes, Neo San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, next time we will be playing 2064 Read-Only Memories. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah. I liked the chance to talk about the apocalypse and plants. Plant brains are very interesting. I just wish the game had done a little bit more with it.
Thank you, Em.
Thank you. I don't thank you for picking this game because I didn't like it at all, but it certainly did some stuff.
Look, you got to dodge Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood.
That's true. You got off light this time, really.
There.
You've dodged some of the worst games I've picked for this show.
But I love roguelikes, and you pick this one, and it made me so sad.
Play Dead Cells. That can be our public service announcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dead Cells is a better game. Yes.
Play Rogue Legacy, play Brogue, play FTL. Take your pick.
Yep, we played several of those games for this show. So go ahead, check it out. And thank you, listeners. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. You can support us on patreon.com/listens. Till next time, peace!